Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us. We have the latest on the tornadoes and flooding down south. Plus, abortion protesters were out in full force in Alabama after that controversial abortion law was signed by their governor. And a debt of gratitude owed to the commencement speaker at the Morehouse College graduation. But first, here are your headlines.
Just days after the U.S. ordered non-emergency personnel out of the American embassy in Baghdad, a rocket has been fired into the Iraqi capital's green zone. It hit less than a mile from the U.S. embassy. No reports of casualties.
As Canada and Mexico roll back tariffs on American agricultural products, the Trump administration is dropping tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from both countries. Amazon is building dedicated warehouses around the country to store hazardous materials. This comes after an incident last year where a can of bear repellent exploded, hospitalizing 24 workers. The first of the dedicated warehouses is being built in Mississippi and is expected to be ready by this summer.
Brooks Koepka, he may have won this weekend's PGA Championship, but he might be waking up on the couch this morning. Before the final round, the 29-year-old was caught on camera rejecting his girlfriend's attempt to kiss him. But not once, TJ. I know you'll give me the eye, but twice. Koepka had his eyes on the prize and had no time for PDA after he seized the PGA Championship trophy, but he made up for it with a few posts, match kisses after celebrating his fourth major title.
All right, we begin with severe weather, a new storm system bringing tornadoes and flooding in Texas and Oklahoma. So I want to go straight to Rob Marciano, who's driving around Oklahoma right now. Rob, how bad is this damage?
Well, we were earlier this morning, and last night, we caught up with a couple that got pretty bad damage from the storms that came through on Saturday here in southwest Oklahoma. On EF2 with winds of 130 miles an hour. Luckily, for lack of a better word, it only hit 2 homes, but those 2 homes are completely destroyed. The woman and her husband in the house, when the walls came crashing down on them, she was pinned to the floor under a bunch of bricks, pretty dramatic stuff. And an older couple, so they're a little bit banged up and bruised and sore, but they survived and very happy about that. The bad part of all of this is that those areas that got hit this weekend, especially here in southwest Oklahoma, we're under the high risk zone for seeing not just tornadoes, but likely violent, large, long-lived tornadoes that stay on the ground for a long time and are going to be more difficult to avoid. These things are going to likely be running at 40, 50, maybe 60 miles an hour. The storm coming in, and I will get into this a little bit, but the storm coming in is that more of March or even February. It's very strong winter-like, a lot of cold air, a lot of jet energy. And so a lot of the ingredients coming together to where we're going to see some serious supercell action here across parts of Oklahoma and the Texas Panhandle. Initiation of that, or when they really get started, isn't really for another couple of hours. So we've got some time to prepare, and they're doing that here, Kimberly, in the way they've closed the public schools along I-35 in Oklahoma City. In that area, the high-risk area has been expanded to include the I-35 corridor, which is there's a lot of towns, a lot of people there. We get a large tornado going through that area. It's a big ask to ask for it to thread the needle and not hit anything. So we're going to need a lot of luck today, I think, to not some sort of damage, if not injury or loss of life, if folks aren't where they need to be during the storms. Kimberly.
All right, Rob, thank you so much. And I'm joined by Melissa Griffin. Thanks for being here. Those images are devastating. I just want to ask you before you give us a national forecast, is this typical for this time of year to see this many tornadoes?
It is. So about mid-April to about mid-June. That's when you're going to see the most active tornadoes in the country, especially in Tornado Alley. Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, that's Tornado Alley. And this is the time frame when the tornadoes occur. We see the volatile atmosphere. We see the cold air with the jet stream in the Rockies combining with that warm, moist air right in the plains coming from the Gulf of Mexico. And that's where it creates this environment where it is just all of the perfect ingredients come together for a tornado outbreak like this. And we've seen many tornadoes this season already in places like Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas, but we haven't seen a high risk like this in quite some time, and we haven't seen it this season. And it is in places like Oklahoma City, Norman, Moore, places where there are towns. And these large, long-track tornadoes can hit these towns, and that's what we're hoping to avoid. So you can see the map here. You see that high risk. It's a large area, and this is rare. The Storm Prediction Center only issues this in a life-threatening and potentially very dangerous situation with destructive long-track tornadoes possible there. Oklahoma City is included in that risk, and this is the 6-year anniversary, May 20th in 2013, when Moore, Oklahoma got hit by one of the worst tornadoes in history. So a very hard day there in Moore, Oklahoma. They're in that high risk again. And anywhere from the western and eastern Texas panhandle into Oklahoma City is going to see this high risk. I want to show you this futurecast radar. It's the supercells. Late this afternoon into the evening, we're most concerned about is those individual cells that can produce these destructive tornadoes and very large hail. Wording right from the Storm Prediction Center, a serious outbreak of destructive tornadic supercells is likely over this region this afternoon and evening. It's a favorable environment for long track and wide tornadoes. So any of these supercells that hit these towns, that's what we're most worried about. It even lasts into the overnight hours. It turns more into a line, damaging winds, a huge threat into the overnight hours after they've already seen possible tornadoes late this evening. The tornado threat does exist overnight as well. Large hail, damaging winds, tornadoes, all through the overnight in this area, and doesn't end today. It continues tomorrow right into parts of the Midwest. So,
are we ever going to see any weather that remotely looks like it's spring or summer?
Well, across the country, we're seeing the damaging storms in the center of the U.S., but it's actually setting up a pattern where we're getting a lot of warm, moist air right here on the East Coast. So it is going to be humid today. It is going to be near 90 degrees here in the Northeast, and up and down the East Coast, seeing very warm temperatures. So it's actually feeling like midsummer here in the East Coast, but those damaging storms in the central U.S. is what they're going to have to contend with today.
Yeah, Melissa. Well, I'm happy for the warm weather, but we do want the people to be safe down south. So thank you so much for the updates. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
And guys, on to the abortion debate. Hundreds of protesters marching on Alabama's Capitol Sunday, chanting "My body, my choice." This comes days after Governor Kay Ivey signed the country's most restrictive abortion law. And again, this law makes it a felony for doctors to perform an abortion unless the mother's health is in danger. There are no exceptions for rape and incest. So I want to bring in Mary Bruce with more. Mary?
Yeah, Kimberly, good morning. Well, more than a dozen states have now passed new restrictions on abortion, and now we are seeing President Trump suggesting that some of these new laws may go too far. He tweeted over the weekend, quote, "I am strongly pro-life with the 3 exceptions: rape, incest, and the life of the mother." Concerned about voter backlash, we're now seeing a growing number of Republicans distancing themselves from some of these new laws, like the near total ban that was passed in Alabama that does not include those exceptions in cases of rape or incest. Kimberly, this is going to be a big issue out on the campaign trail. We are already seeing many of the Democratic candidates weigh in. And while the president is taking issue with some parts of these new laws, he has also promised to overturn Roe versus Wade. Kimberly?
All right. Thank you, Mary. And I want to bring in Travers at the White House to continue this conversation. Karen, I just want to ask you, how do you think this is going to play politically? Because the president, he's been focused on the late-term abortions, and he's been saying that on the campaign trail. But what's going on right now is different from that.
Yeah, and we actually asked the president on Friday when he came back to the White House from New York if that Alabama abortion law went too far. That was my question, shouted at the president. He didn't engage with reporters, but by tweeting that over the weekend and suggesting that he thought the Alabama and that Missouri law went too far, it certainly means he's going to get asked this question for the next few days. And whether or not he'll put this at the center of his re-election message, we have to wait and see. He gets a chance tonight when he does a campaign rally in the middle of Pennsylvania, a very critical state in 2016 for the president's win, and another key state for him again for his re-election campaign. So I think tonight we might get a sneak preview of how prominent this big cultural issue may factor into his campaign message, or maybe he doesn't at all and decides to stick to the economy and security issues.
Well, we're always very much interested in what people are saying on your radio calls. What were they saying about this abortion debate?
Just a lot of questions about what the president is going to do with this issue, and questions about whether you risk revving up the Democratic base by trying to rev up your own base. We know that for decades, Republicans have really pushed this issue as a way to get their supporters out to the polls, a subset of the Republican base. The president, as we heard from Mary, as a candidate in 2016, pledged to appoint pro-life justices to the Supreme Court. He did just that, making good on that promise. And now we have to see whether or not he continues trying to put that out there, because you do run that risk of, if you make this a front and center campaign issue. We saw those protests over the last couple of days in states like Alabama and Missouri. This is an issue that the Democratic candidates say they'll also want to engage on.
And Karen, before we go, I just want to talk quickly about Republican Justin Amash. He made news for being the first Republican to speak out and say, call for Trump's impeachment on Saturday. What do we know about that?
Yeah, I mean, he's not somebody that's been a fierce ally of President Trump's. He has voted against the president's agenda on some issues. He says he read the Mueller report and came to the conclusion that the president's behavior and conduct and actions has reached the threshold of impeachment. The president could have let this go, but Kimberly, no surprise, he did not, and tweeted over the weekend that Amash is a lightweight. He's somebody that's not one of them. He's not one of his supporters, and that Amash is doing this just to get himself more publicity. But he did. The president tweeting it out to nearly 60 million people certainly gives him that publicity.
All right, Karen Travers at the White House, thank you so much for joining us. And guys, we move overseas to Egypt. A roadside bomb hit a tourist bus near the Giza pyramids. Can you even imagine this? At least 17 people were wounded. So I want to go to James Longman, who's in London. James, first off, the Minister of Tourism of Egypt, she called it a minor explosion, but I'm just imagining myself on a tourist bus. It doesn't matter what type of explosion it is. It would be absolutely terrifying. Can you tell us exactly what happened?
Well, that's right, Kimberly. I think probably she was speaking in comparison to other attacks that have taken place in Egypt, which sadly resulted in a loss of life. This one didn't, but as you say, very, very scary indeed. A bomb went off on a road near the Egyptian Museum, the Grand Museum, which is being built there, relocated from central Cairo. And just as that tourist bus went by, the bomb exploded. And the pictures of the bus are pretty extraordinary, that people walked away from that. The windows all the way down one side, totally blown out. We know that 7 South African tourists were injured and 10 Egyptian civilians. Most of them just treated there, or 3 of them, we're told, had to go to the hospital. But this is the second attack in that part of Egypt in less than 6 months. Another attack took place in December. 3 Vietnamese tourists and their Egyptian tour guide were all killed. So perhaps that's why the Egyptian foreign minister was speaking in comparison perhaps to earlier attacks. But yeah, absolutely terrifying for tourists going to Egypt. No one has claimed responsibility, but Egypt has been involved in a fight with Islamic militants for quite some time now.
And do we know if there's any step up in the security since this happened?
Well, I imagine there's going to be a big crackdown on known groups in Egypt. One of the areas of Egypt which has been a particular problem is the Sinai, where groups associated with the so-called Islamic State operate. Probably their biggest ever attack was back in 2015 when they brought down that Russian airliner, killing something like 200 people. But I think this stretches further back even to 2011, at the beginning of the protest movement there, the removal of Hosni Mubarak and the continued to and fro between, if you like, established military and the grassroots Muslim Brotherhood and the activists in Egypt, because that has meant a breakdown really in law and order. And I can tell you, Kimberly, you know, I was raised between London and Cairo. It's a beautiful place, Cairo. I spent a lot of my childhood there, and it's very sad to see these sorts of things happen. Egyptians are beautiful, lovely, smiley, funny people. And when these things happen, yes, it's scary for tourists, but tourism is the biggest motor of the Egyptian economy. And most of the millions of Egyptians who live there live on less than $1 a day. So they are the people who suffer when these things happen. Kimberly?
Yeah, very interesting point there, James. Thank you so much for the updates. We appreciate that. So guys, if you were looking for some good news, billionaire Robert F. Smith delivered. He was the commencement speaker at Morehouse College on Sunday, and he announced that he would pay off all debt for the entire 2019 graduating class. Take a look.
On behalf of the 8 generations of my family who have been in this country, we're going to put a little fuel in your bus. My family is making a grant to eliminate their student loans.
All right. Okay. So, and if you didn't catch this guy when Robert F. Smith was speaking, you can check him out in the corner. Yes, that reaction. I think that was all of us. I think I was personally jumping around like they were my student loans. This was huge. So Steve Osunsami is in Atlanta with more.
Kimberly, administrators here on Morehouse's campus are still trying to figure out how all of this is going to work. What we understand is that Mr. Smith, Robert F. Smith, is giving the school a $40 million grant of some sort, and that's going to be used to pay off all of these loans. It was quite a surprise. Administrators had a copy of the speech in advance, and none of this was in there. They were surprised as anyone else. You could see it on the faces of everyone. School administrators, parents, students, no one was expecting this at all, and they are all overjoyed. We talked with one student who told us that he has $100,000 in debt. And the idea that he's going to walk into the world with all of that paid off is just blowing his mind. Smith is the quiet billionaire most people have never heard of. He's worth an estimated $5 billion and recently surpassed Oprah Winfrey as the wealthiest African American in this country. He's also the first black business leader to sign Bill and Melinda Gates' Giving Pledge, where the wealthiest Americans agreed to give half of their wealth to philanthropy. Again, wiping out all of the debt of this entire graduating class, some 400 students. People here couldn't be happier, and we're still waiting to see exactly how all of this is going to shake out. Kimberly.
Thank you, Steve. That is just absolutely unbelievable. The man deserves a hand clap. So as we know, school is winding down all over the country, and at the Naval Academy, the end of the first year for students is marked by the infamous Herndon climb, and it's happening today. For those of you who don't know what it is, okay, so the climb is an event where the freshman class, or plebes as they're called, build a human pyramid to try and reach the top of a monument to remove a Dixie Cup sailor hat, and then they replace it with an upperclassman's hat. If that isn't enough, the 21-foot monument gets covered with about 50 pounds of vegetable shortening, making reaching the top only possible with teamwork and perseverance. And that's what this is all about, because the monument is named after Commander William Lewis Herndon, who represented these things: discipline, teamwork, and courage. And after successfully completing the Herndon climb, the freshmen are no longer called plebes, and they move on to fourth class midshipmen. And now it's quite a spectacle, and we'll be there covering the scene live on the ground. We're covering it later today, so make sure you check that out. It's going to be amazing, as you can see. And guys, a few weeks back, James Longman was able to visit the breathtakingly beautiful and cold continent of Antarctica. But it was a trip with a purpose, because it is ground zero for climate change. So take a look at this.
James Longman for ABC News in Antarctica, and what an extraordinary thing to be able to say. Just look at where we are. This is actually the first time in something like 30 years that ABC has been to this continent. It is the wildest place on Earth, the coldest place on Earth, the continent that was most recently discovered, and it's truly an honor to be here. We've come for a very particular reason, because this is the ground zero of climate change. You've heard a lot about global warming. Well, no better place to understand it than here. In fact, this continent is warming 10 times faster than anywhere else on the planet. It was at scientific stations like these that they have worked out over the last few decades what exactly is going on with rising temperatures. In fact, all the ocean around here is warmer, 5 degrees warmer than it was 50 years ago. And that means the sea ice that surrounds this continent in the winter, well, that's melting quicker. In fact, there are 80 days fewer sea ice a year than there were previously. But if you don't want to believe the scientists, you can just look at what wildlife are doing, understand their behavior. And that is what a lot of people are doing at the moment with regard to krill. That's the tiny shrimp-like creature that basically subsists all of the wildlife in this part of the world. And they are moving further and further south to find colder water. That means that all the animals that eat krill, like whale, like penguin, like the fish, they've got to move too. This place is absolutely stunning, but it is very definitely at risk.
Yeah, the images there are stunning. And if you want to see more about this story, you can check it out on Nightline tonight. All right, guys, a lot of candidates in the 2020 presidential race, but down in Florida, there's a very familiar name that's going to be on the ballot for Miami-Dade County Commission. Sybrina Fulton, mother of Trayvon Martin, is running to represent District 1. She's been in the spotlight ever since her teenage son was killed, advocating to end gun violence and promote social justice. And she started the Trayvon Martin Foundation, named in her son's memory. And in a statement on Sunday, she said, "Since 2012, I've advocated tirelessly to empower our communities and make them safe, but the work is not done." And before we go, another race that was making history takes over Chicago today, a new era beginning. Today is the inauguration of the city's 56th mayor, Lori Lightfoot. She's the city's first black woman mayor and the first openly gay mayor. She never held an elected office before, but she rose to the top of a crowded race and won in a landslide victory. She will no doubt inherit a lot of the city's challenges, but she said she is prepared to tackle them. So guys, we appreciate you joining us. And if you're around, you can stick around for the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. And then you can check out World News Prime at 8 p.m. And if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app. I'm Kimberly Brooks. We'll see you tomorrow.